All right, this is where we were up to last week. Shoftim Perek Aleph, still in Perek Aleph. This hopefully will be the last shear for today. This, sort of this round on Perek Aleph itself. I want to finish our discussion here, and then we'll move on to Perek Bet after Purim. Just a quick review of what we did last week. We started to look at this parak from a perspective of a analysis of which tribes, literally goes through all the tribes one by one, which tribes were more successful, which tribes were less successful in the overall effort to conquer, to settle, and to essentially take control from a perspective of Bnei Yisrael, take control of and either give the Canaanites the option to abandon their idolatry and accept the Sheva Mitzvah Bnei Noach, or to leave the land, or to kind of duke it out, if you will. But the idea was to create an idolatry-free zone in the land of Israel. Which tribes were more successful, which tribes were less successful, and the parak goes through a list. And much of this list is a review of things that we looked at in Sefer Yoshua, although we looked at it in much more detail. And this parak kind of collapses and encapsulates all of those sort of tribal conquests in one parak. In so doing, however, it gives us a window into and foreshadowing of some of the events to come in the Sefer, which is why I entitled the shir a snapshot of what was, what is, and what is yet to be, meaning there are certainly references here of events that we'll see unfold in the course of Parak, of Sefer Shoftim. And so in this way, the Parak becomes not only a review of Sefer Yoshua, or its conclusion, but also a foreshadowing of events that will be forthcoming in the Sefer. So we started with an analysis of Yehuda, and they're certainly the most successful of all the tribes in this regard. Took Shimon with him, and we spent some time talking about Shimon and why Shimon didn't get their own nachlo, or their own inheritance. Last week, we touched upon this middle story of Bnei Keni, Choten Moshe, and the fact that they, in part, join Yehuda in the south, and a part of them goes up north, and they remain a part of, but also apart from Bnei Yisrael throughout the generations. If you missed that shir, you're welcome to catch up. And then Yehuda and Shimon continue further south. The next story we addressed was the Yevusi in Yerushalayim and the status of Yerushalayim. That's also referenced here. And the fact that on the one hand, they conquer Yerushalayim, on the other hand, they never established Yerushalayim as any kind of spiritual center or anchor in Yoshua and in Shoftim. It's clear that either they are not in Yerushalayim because they're in the area around the Jebusite hill, which we know as Ir David today, which was Mitzudat David, that is not yet conquered. David HaMelech will take it many years later, but for now, Yerushalayim is a sort of a broader area, and they conquer Yerushalayim, where they get to Yerushalayim, but they move on. The historical, spiritual significance of Yerushalayim either is not known, or they don't necessarily know where the place of, for example, the Akedah is. It certainly doesn't play a role in this part of Jewish history. It will become much more significant in the story of David HaMelech. And we talked about the fact that it sits as a border between Yehuda and Binyamin. And so I have two different verses, each describing whether Binyamin didn't conquer Yevus or Yehuda doesn't conquer Yevus, but that essentially is where that is left off. And that's really the only reference to Binyamin and the piece that Binyamin is unable to do, which is to conquer Yevusi. So from a map perspective, and this map is also in your, on the source page. From the map perspective, essentially, if I look at the map from Yehuda southward, they are more or less successful in taking their territory all the way down to Beersheba, the area that belongs to Shimon. Negev Arad, which is where Bnei Kini end up going. Devir, Lachish, Hebron, Yemut, Yishalayim, these are the cities of Yehuda, further into Eretz Plishtim a little bit. And then Binyamin, who doesn't say much about Binyamin, except for the fact that this little enclave of Yevusi remains unconquered or unsettled, neither by Yehuda in the south, nor by Binyamin to the north. And that's where we left off. Oh no, we did Beit Yosef. Ve'alu Beit Yosef kamhem Bet El Hashem Imam. Then we have this reference to Beit Yosef, which is overall Beit Yosef. Ephraim, Menashe doesn't distinguish. We'll see Ephraim and Menashe break down into two different tribe assessments in a moment. But for now, Beit Yosef as a whole, they come to Beit El. And one of the things we suggest is a whole history of Beit El. We reviewed it last week, and we talked about the fact that the possibility that this Beit El is the Beit El of Yaakov, not the Beit El of Avraham. They're two different cities, and that in fact this Beit El may be a reference to Shiloh, as it appears in Sefer Shoftim. Shiloh is often referred to as Beit El, and so that would take us where my map. That would take us here to explain why or how they settle in the area of Shiloh, B'Hashem Imam, taking the Shekhinah, taking the Aron, the Ark, the Mishkan with them into Shiloh. That too is an event in Sefer Yehoshua. And we're shifting our focus northward in this walk through or trek through the assessment, the grading, which tribes were more successful, which tribes were less successful in their settlement of their land. And that's what we got into. Pasuk Chav Zayin. Okay, that was a quick review of the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Everybody with me? Good, thumbs up. You can all hear and see me. We're ready to go. Next assessment. V'lo harish Menashe. All right, so now we're at Menashe. So let me just, before we even get there, is there a map here? No. So before we even get there, let's put this map back. If I look at this map, this is a map of all the tribes and where they're supposed to be, right? This is the tribal kind of list of all the cities per Shevet. Not necessarily where they ended up settling, but where they were assigned to be settled. So Yehuda and Shimon, everything south of the line from more or less Yerushalayim across to there's some Timna, Ekron, Ashdod, this area here. All of this is Judah to the south. Eshtaol, Tzara. North of Yehuda is Binyamin. That's the orange here. And then we'll come to Dan at the very end. North, we're moving north. So we're moving from Yehuda and Shimon through Binyamin. Now we're going to get to Ephraim and Menashe. Bnei Yosef, we started with the discussion of Shiloh, which is in Shevet Ephraim, and now we're going to get to the areas of Menashe and Ephraim that they were unable to conquer, and our glance and our shift is going to continue to migrate northward, Yisachar, Zvulun, Naphtali, Asher, etc. So let's see where that takes us. By Menashe, it says, V'lo horish Menashe, et Beit Sha'an, bet Benotea, bet Ta'anach, bet Benotea, bet Yoshvei Dor, bet Benotea, bet Yoshvei Yivla'am, bet Benotea, bet Yoshvei Megiddo, bet Benotea. And now for the first time, I have not just a region or a city that is described as they were unable to settle, but I have an entire series of cities and their towns and their area, meaning it's not just the city of Tanakh, but it's Tanakh and all of its environs, all of its suburbs. We have the greater Tanakh region, the greater Yivla'am region, the greater Dors region, Emek Beit Shan, the valley of Beit Shan, and the city of Beit Shan, and all of the towns in that area, similar to with Megiddo. So now I have a much larger description of an area that Menashe was unable to settle in or drive out to the inhabitants of. And the Canaanites remained. Vayehi ki chazak Yisrael. It happened when Israel grew strong. Then Vayasem et Canaani lamas. They made the Canaanites pay a tribute. I don't like the translation of forced labor because I think it's incorrect. A mas is either a tax or a kind of the way it worked in biblical terms is that there was a period of time in which, on a rotation basis, if you paid a mas or a tribute to the king or to the authority, you either paid it in finance, in tax, or in a period of time in which you worked the for the king. We'll talk about that in a little bit later in Tanakh. V'horesh lo horishu, but they did not drive them out. We'll come back to Menashe in a moment. The Ephraim lo horishu et haknani yoshev b'gazer. Ephraim was unable to conquer, to settle in the area of Gezer. Vayeshev haknani b'kirbo b'gazer. And the Canaanites remained and dwelled in their midst in Gaza. So of Ephraim and Menashe, it doesn't tell us what they managed to do. That's domain of Yehuda and Ephraim and not Ephraim, Yehuda and Binyamin, but it tells us what they were unable to do. Menashe was unable to take the scope, the swath of cities known as Beit Shan, Tanach, Megiddo, Dor, Yivla'am. We'll talk about what those cities are in a second. And Ephraim was unable to settle in the area of Gezer. I look at a map of the tribal regions. I'm going to zoom in for a moment. Of Ephraim, the area of Gezer is, if you see here in the border between Ephraim and Dan, the area of Gezer. Gezer is a very important city and plays a very significant role throughout Tanakh history and later, primarily because it kind of sits on a crossroads of both river and roads. Right? There's a river here. There's also a road here that cuts down into Derech Eretz Plishtim, into the coast. And so Gezer was a very important strategic location. The Canaanites held Gezer. Ephraim was unable to take it. As you can see from the topography, Gezer is already in the coast. And the common theme between all of this is that the areas that were coastal, that were flatland, were much more difficult for Israel to conquer because they were unable to deal with the Canaanite chariots and horses, which were effective as an army on the coastland, much less effective in the hills where they fought on foot soldiers, and that was Israel had a much easier and a much more upper hand in that regard. That's with regards to Ephraim. Menashe is a different conversation. The list of cities that the Navi described as having been cities that were unable to be conquered by Menashe, or settled by Menashe, begin in Beit Shan. So Beit Shan, Ta'anach and its suburbs, Dor and its suburbs, Yivla'im, I'm not sure is on the map. Oh yes, Yivla'im is on the map here. And the final city is Megiddo. Now, what's fascinating about those cities, if you look at the map, if I were to draw a line, can I do this? If I were to draw a line from Beit Shan to Yivla'im to Ta'anach, Megiddo, and Dor, what area of the country have I just kind of traced through?
The Galil.
The Galil, but specifically an area within the Galil known as
Emek Israel.
Emek Israel, correct. This is the valley of Emek Israel. And it's a window into a story that's going to unfold for us throughout Sefer Shoftim. We're going to see it a number of times. The historical, strategic importance of this stretch of land known as the Jezreel Valley or Emek Israel, named after the city of Israel. All right, let me do this. How do I? Okay. I never figured out how to erase. There must be a way to erase. Well, the only way I know how to erase is the hard way, which is I do this. No, that's not going to even do it. I got to stop sharing and reshare. I'll figure out how to erase one day. But for now, that's the hard way.
Hit
Okay.
Control Z.
If I look at this map, yeah, somebody got a question?
Control Z will erase. It will undo what you just did.
I tried that and it didn't work. I think there's an eraser icon somewhere, but I'm not going to bother with it now. Okay, coming back to this map. This is the other map that you have in your source pages. And this also outlines the area of Beit Shan, Tanakh, Megiddo, Dor. You can kind of see the line. And this map is very important for us. We're going to be in this map all through Sefer Shoftim. This, and we were here in Sefer Yeshua as well. This is a map which outlines in color, more or less, the summary of Parak Aleph, what parts of the land of Israel had control of and were able to drive out the Canaanites and the Canaanite influence from, and the yellow representing the areas that remained in Canaanite control. And more or less, it's kind of a mirror image of the population centers of Jews today in Israel. That is nature of modern history. We were, for the most part, unable to take any control over the coast because, as I said before, the Canaanites had chariots and to protect them and to arm the army, and they were very effective on the coast. And we'll see that in the context of Shevet Dan very clearly. This area here, however, is a little different. This is not coastal land. This is valley. This is surrounded by hills on both sides. This is the valley of Emek Israel. And Menashe is described as belonged to the tribe of Menashe. Yisachar is further north. I'm not sure why Yisachar is listed here. But from Beit Shan to Dor, this entire region of Emek Israel is a very important strategic swath of land. Why is it so important? Why is it so strategic? So it's important for, I think, two primary reasons. One is obvious. To the south, I have Menashe, Ephraim, Binyamin, Yehuda, Gad. Right? I have all these tribes to the south. Well, Reuben and Gad I'm going to leave out of the picture for now because they're on the other side of the Jordan. They have their own border issues to worry about. But Judah, Binyamin, and Ephraim and Menashe are to the south of Emek Israel. North, I have Yisachar. Yisachar is actually in the valley itself. Zvulun, Naphtali, Asher, and eventually Dan. In other words, Emek Israel was the effective center line of the tribes of Israel. If I looked at it not from population centers, but from the perspective of the tribes themselves, this valley split the country. So that's one piece of the story. But there's a much more important piece of the story, which is driving much of the history of the time, which is the road structure in ancient Israel. I don't know if we've had a chance to talk about this in the past. For some reason, I think it's come up. But there are certain roads that run through the land of Israel, both then historically and today, really till today, trade routes that were critically important. I don't know if you can see in the map these very thin orange lines. Can you see the very thin orange lines that go up here, like Bashan, and here across to Chatzor? Can you see those? Okay, these are roads. These are the ancient trade route lines listed here on the map key. No, they're not listed on the map key, but they're there. These are essentially the main roads that run through the trade routes of the ancient world. And what do you notice about these roads? There's one here that goes from Cheshbon, Rabat Ne'amon, Ramat Gilad, Ashtarot. And then there's another one here that runs Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Even Ezer, Megiddo, Tyre. Right? What's the most important characteristic of these roads? These are the trade routes. They control all of commerce in the ancient world.
They run north and south.
They're all ports.
They run north and south. I'll show you a map, which you don't have on your source page. I apologize. I'll send it to the office at some point. This is a map. It's a very small schematic map, but it's very powerful, of all the ancient roads at the time of Tanakh and how Tanakh refers to them. So, for example, this road here, which runs north through the Syrian-African rift, or if you will, the Jordan Valley, the east side of the Jordan Valley, this road is referred to as Derech HaMelech, also known as the King's Highway. It's referred to in Chumash in Bamidbar when Moshe Rabbeinu is negotiating with Sichon and with Ammon and with Moab, and he refers to it and he says, Derech HaMelech Nelech. We want to go via Derech HaMelech. Derech HaMelech is also kind of a euphemism for kind of the straight and narrow, staying on the main road, not veering. Okay, Derech HaMelech. But it was a road. That was what it was called, the King's Highway, and it went all the way up north to Damascus. But it runs north-south. The other major trade route is along the coast. That is referred to either as Derech Hayam, the sea coast, the sea road, or as it's referred to in Sefer Shmot, we just had at the beginning of Pashat B'Shalach, this road runs all the way down across the top of the Sinai Desert, and this was the road not taken by Moshe and Bnei Yisrael as they left Egypt, referred to as Derech Eretz Plishtim, the road that runs through the land of Eretz Plishtim. That's the road we didn't. That's the shortcut road from Mitzrayim down here along the northern coast of the Sinai Desert. You end up in northern Sinai, and you end up coming straight along the coast. Right? That's the coast. That's the road they didn't take. But these two roads from Sidon all the way down south to Egypt is a major trade route that caravans and business and travel would take. This is the other major road from Damascus down south, down to the Gulf. What's the problem with these two roads? They are parallel to each other and they do not meet, because parallel lines don't meet. So there's a third major road, which is not so traveled for trade route, but it was traveled by Abraham, by Yaakov, right? And that's the road that goes from the north, from Haran, into the land of Israel via the tops of the mountain ridge, right? The sort of the center of the mountain, or the top of the mountain, and that goes from Shechem. That's Abraham. First place comes to is Shechem, heads down south to Beit El, go from there to Hebron, and then from there to Beersheba, south down to Egypt, and then back. So this is a route you can go if you're walking on foot. Not such a good road if you are going by caravan, if you're involved in trade, in commerce, if you're taking chariot and caravans and much harder to travel this road. So if I'm going from Damascus and I want to trade from Damascus to Egypt, I'm really stuck either north. I'm either going on Derech HaMelech or I'm going on Derech Eretz Plishtim. Where am I going to cross from road A to road B? The easiest trade route across and the center of all commerce in that time period runs through Emek Beit Shan, Ta'anach, Megiddo, Akko. This valley here, referred to as Emek Yisrael, or the Jezreel Valley. This is the road that links our two major highways. Whoever controls this strip of land controls all commerce in the ancient world. It is strategically and economically critical for all commerce to function. Okay, so what does that leave us? It leaves us with a world in which one of the most strategic pieces of real estate remains in Canaanite control. So if the Israelites want to engage in commerce and financial business, they're going to have to travel through Emek Israel, which puts them into physical proximity to the Canaanites. It puts them into cultural interaction with the Canaanites. It puts them into a position where they're not paying taxes to us. We are being forced to pay taxes to them. And this is a role reversal in one of the most strategic places in the land. And so it's described that at some point or another, Vayiki Chazak Yisrael, when Israel was strong enough to reverse the table, then Vayasarem et HaKna'ani Lamas, they were able to reverse the financial picture of that control over that region. But they do not drive out the Canaanites completely. This road remains an Achilles heel in, where is it? This Canaanite foothold remains an Achilles heel in all the period of Sefer Shoftim. Doesn't come under Israelite control until really the beginning of Sefer Shmuel.
Question.
Yeah.
Emek Israel is also a very fertile region. Does that play any role? The fact that
it might. It's certainly fertile today. I don't know how much it was considered a fertile, green, lush farming paradise in Tanakh, but it certainly was a strategic position from a perspective of the roads. The roads in ancient world are very important militarily. They are today as well. Right? The Ben Gurion once quipped that the fight for Israel's survival will be fought on the roads. It's very true. And that was certainly true then as well. I'll give you an example. If we shift our attention forward just a little bit, we're in Parak Aleph. Let's just take a quick glance forward to Parak Daled of Shoftim. Parak Daled is the beginning of the story of Devorah and Barak. And that story begins, Vayosifu b'nei Yisrael lasot hara b'nei Hashem ve'Ehud meit. After the death of Ehud, Israel began to again slide into the. We'll talk about what that slide is, but they began to do evil in the eyes of God. Vayimkerem Hashem b'yad Yavin melech Canaan. God enabled Yavin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Chatzor, which is in the Galil, to kind of take a strong hand against Israel, and he sent his general, the Sar Tzava'o, by the name of Sisra. We looked at this for a moment last week when we talked about Yael and who Yael was. Sar Tzava'o Sisra, v'hu yoshev b'charoshet hagoyim. Sisra sat in a city called Charoshet Hagoyim. So for this, we just need a map. And this is very important to see a map. Here is the map of the story of Ehud and Barak, and of Devorah and Barak, and the war against Sisra. We'll see Mount Tabor plays a big role in this story. But the story begins with Sisra sitting in Charoshet Hagoyim. Charoshet Hagoyim is here at the beginning, the top corner of the Jezreel Valley of Emek Israel. Yavin Melech Chatzor is sitting up here in Chatzor. Why is he sending his general down here to Charoshet? And the answer is because how do you strangle the economy of Israel? You sit and control the valley of Emek Israel. And that's exactly what he does. Vayitz'aku b'nei Yisrael el Hashem, Israel cried out to God, Ki chamot rechev barzel lo, because Sisra had an army of chariots, 900 chariots. For 20 years, he controlled and oppressed Israel. He had a stranglehold in Israel. For 20 years, Sisra and 900 chariots policed and controlled this valley. And if they controlled this valley, that means that Israel has no access and no trade unless they pay for it. And hence, if you look at Shirat Devorah, when Devorah describes the challenge before the battle, and how that battle is won, we'll see when we get to Perek Dalet and Hey. But when Devorah describes that battle, remember the names of the cities: Megiddo, Ta'anach. We saw Ta'anach, we saw Megiddo, we saw Beit Shan, right? When Devorah describes the background to the battle with Barak, with Sisera, she describes it in the Shira. And what she says is, before Pra'ot B'Yisrael, when the people of Israel let loose, when they were people of, when the roads were free, when the roads were open, Bitnadev Am, Baruch Hu Hashem, and she goes on and she says the following. I'm going to skip the beginning. B'imei Shamgar ben Anat, in the days of Shamgar ben Anat, in the days of Yael, Chadlu arachot. What does chadlu arachot mean? Arachot were highways, were caravans. Arachot Yishmaelim, when Yaakov's children, when the sons of Israel were in the north waiting, when Yosef comes to them, the story of the sale of Yosef, he meets them, by the way, in Dotan, he goes to Dotan to meet them in Dotan, and he hears that they're in the area of Shechem, and that's all a part of the story of the sale of Yosef. But they see an Orchat Yishmaelim ba. They saw a caravan of Yishmaelim coming, and they sold Yosef to that caravan of Yishmaelim and Midanim. Orchot is a caravan. It's a function of trade, right? When you went on business trips or trade trips, you didn't go by yourself. You went in caravans because A, you had a lot of produce, and B, it was dangerous to travel by yourself. So in those days, of the days of Yael, meaning the days prior to this great time, Chadlu arachot, caravans stopped. Holchei netivot, travelers by the ways. Arachot akalkalot, they would have to travel through the byways. They would have to travel through the side roads. They would have to travel through roads untraveled. Now, that's not just an inconvenience, you understand. To travel through uncharted roads was virtually impossible. And to describe the roads empty of caravans, empty of commerce. Chadalu purazon b'Yisrael chadelu, open cities in Israel, open trade in Israel ceased. This was a crisis. This is what is described in Perek Dalet as a stranglehold on Israel for 20 years. All because Sisera controlled the valley of Emek Yisrael with 900 chariots. Until the story that we will learn about take place. And in that story, Israel was victorious over the chariots of Sisera and was able to remove them from the conversation, and then free the land, free the area. What area are we talking about? Take a look at Pasuk Yutet. Ba'u melachim nilchamu, kings came and fought. Az nilchamu malchei Canaan, the kings of Canaan fought. B'ta'anach, al mei Megiddo. That's a kesef lolokach. They fought at the cities of Tanakh and at the waters of Megiddo. They fought not for silver, not for, because they weren't mercenaries. They were Canaanite kings who were fighting against the Israelite kings, and we fought back and we were victorious. But that's exactly the region she's talking about, Tanakh, Megiddo. This is the area of Emek Israel.
Yeah.
And when that battle was over, and when we were victorious against the king of Canaan, of Chatzor, God subdued the hand of Yavin, king of Canaan, against Israel on that day. The hand of Israel began to prevail stronger and stronger against Yavin, king of Canaan, Adashi Achritu, and Yavin Melech Canaan, until they were able to be victorious. But it doesn't describe them having settled in their land and taking over Emek Israel, etc. It talks about subduing the king of Yavan, the king of Canaan, of Chatzor. That's exactly what it says here. The area that Menashe was unable to conquer, to settle, to remove the Canaanites, to spread Israelite presence in, were Beit Shan, Tanach, Megiddo, Dor, all the cities of Emek Israel. There will come a time, and we saw a glance of it in several generations, when Chazak Yisrael, when Israel will become strong. So this isn't about what happened in the past. This is what will happen in the future. And it's a glance into the world of another episode in Sefer Shoftim, namely the story of Devorah and Barak and their battle against Sisera, all around this region called Emek Israel. Critical piece of real estate strategically in the land of Israel. Okay. Questions? All right. Then let's move to the remaining tribes. And here the Navi doesn't tell us a lot. I'm losing my English. Right? Doesn't tell us a lot. It gives us snapshots. Zvulun. Interesting. It skips Yisachar. Okay. Zvulun lo harishu yeshvei Kitron vet yeshvei Nehalol. Vayeshev Aknani b'kirbo. Vayilamas. Zvulun was unable to remove the inhabitants of Kitron and Nehalol. In the map, I should. Oh, did I close that map? I think I closed that map. Zvulun, it's just north of Menashe on the northern side of Emek Israel. The cities are not on this map. Okay. But two areas that they were unable to take were Kitron and Nahalol, and the Canaanite remained in the midst, became Lamas. Either they paid tribute, they paid taxes, or they did not. Asher. Right, we're moving northward. We're moving through, if you have a glimpse of where the list of the tribes are, we went from, where did I go? We went from Yehuda and Binyamin to Ephraim and Menashe. Then we went to Zulun. We skipped Yisachar, I'm not sure why. Moves north into Zvulun, and then from Zvulun, who's left? Asher and Naphtali, plus one more, we'll see. Asher lo harishut yeshvei Akko, vet yeshvei Sidon, ואת אחלה ואת אכזיב ואת חלבה ואת אפיק ואת רחוב. Now I have a whole host of cities that Asher was unable to settle in. I look at the map.
Was it?
Let's put this map. Asher, Akko, Afek, Achsaf, Tzor, Tyre, Tzidon. Actually, you know what? Let's do this.
Wasn't Sidon an independent city? An independent trade city?
Well, it belonged to Shevet. It was assigned to Shevet Asher.
Yeah.
Did you say that they, in the times of Shmuel, they did conquer the Canaanim?
By Shaul and David, yes.
Right. But they continued to live in Eretz Yisrael, didn't they?
Some not. That's a subject of study for Sefer Shmuel. The Plishtim, yes. The Plishtim were an ongoing threat. But the time of David and Shaul really and David, by the time David Melech has control over the land, number of Canaanites left are very small.
No, wait.
The other threats that become more prominent at that time, which are the threats around them, Moab, Ammon, Ashur, etc., made later in history, But the Canaanites, the Plishtim, which are down here on the coast, but the Canaanites are essentially a threat in Sefer Shoftim, less so in Sefer Shmuel, because Shaul and David managed to conquer the remaining parts of the land. But if I look at the tribe of Asher, cities that were assigned to Asher that they did not settle in are Akko, Sidon, right? Sidon is all the way up here in right north. Achlav, Achziv, Chelba, right? This is all part of what today is part of Lebanon and further. That was unconquered territory that was assigned to Asher. Vayesh, now look at the description here. We'll do this. Oops, that's not going to work. Okay. I have to learn this technology a little better. Vayeshev Asheri bekerev Knaani Yoshvei Haaretz. The Asherites continued to dwell amongst the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land. What's just changed? What language shift has just taken place?
The Asherites dwell among the Canaani instead of the Canaani dwelling among the tribe that has the main
We have a
language.
complete reversal of roles. Instead of describing which Canaanite enclaves remained within the tribal territory of Israel, we suddenly have the Asherites as a tribal enclave, Bekerev Knaani, amidst the Canaanites. And the Canaanites are described as Yoshvei Haaretz, the inhabitants of the land. And we have a complete reversal of roles. And that's because if I look at the map, really, Asher, how much of again, the Israelites never get control of the coast. They only remain in the mountain range. So they can remain in the Galil, they can take a foothold in the upper Galil, even in the Golan, but they're unable to reach down into the valley and along the coast. And that's where the tribe of Asher was assigned. So they are pushed into the region together with Naphtali into the area of the upper Galil. But they do not, and Lebanon, up to the names of places that are familiar to us today, but they do not end up in their tribal territory, on the contrary. That's Asher. Naphtali. Naphtali lo harishit yeshvei bet Shemesh vet yeshvei bet Anat. Now, for all of those who might be in Beit Shemesh, I'm in Beit Shemesh. This is not the same Beit Shemesh, because the same Beit Shemesh that we are in is in Mate Yehuda. This is in Mate Naphtali. Naphtali is all the way up here in the north. This is Naphtali. So Chatzor is in Naphtali. This Kedesh Naphtali, as we'll see later on. This is not the area of Beit Shemesh to the south, so Beit Shemesh to the north. We talked about the fact that cities in Tanakh repeat themselves very often, right? Because you have a farmland would be Beit Lechem, a place with a temple would be a Beit El, Beit Shemesh, but it could be some. It could also be a place where they had a temple to the sun, which was not uncommon. Always bothered me that the symbol of the city of Beit Shemesh is the sun. It bothers me, but okay. Naphtali lo rishit Yishvei Beit Shemesh v'Yishvei Beit Anat. Vayeshev bekerev Knaani Yoshvei Haaretz. And again, they dwelt amongst the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land. V'Yishvei Beit Shemesh v'Beit Anat hayu lehem lamas. They places that they were able to take taxes from for a period of time, but they did not conquer.
So the Jews that are now living in the Arabs that are now living in Akko, in Natseret, aren't the Jews living among the Arabs? Isn't it the same thing?
I will let you use your own imagination to draw parallels or not between Tanakh and contemporary moments in history. I prefer to avoid the the political statements, be they correct or not, but yes, I think that that's a fair assessment. But I'm trying to, yes. Okay. The short answer is yes, but more complicated answer is for a different time. So if I look at this list of the tribes that we just mentioned, Ephraim, Zvulun, Asher, Naphtali, right? That's the next four after Menashe and the description of Em and Piachan, of Ephraim, Zvulun, Asher, and Naphtali. Of Ephraim and Zvulun, it says that there were cities, areas that they could not drive out the Canaanites. The Canaanites paid taxes to them when they were strong enough to maintain control. Of Asher and Naphtali, the language shifts to an exact reversal, where it's that Asher and Naphtali dwelt amongst the Canaanites. Vayeshev Asheri b'kerev HaKnani, and Vayeshev b'kerev HaKnani yoshvei haaretz. I charted this out on the source page that I gave you because I wanted you to see the progression in language from Ephraim to Naphtali, from Vayeshev HaKnani b'kirbo, the Canaanites who dwelt amongst them, to Vayeshev HaAsheri b'kerev HaKnani. And that really traces the progression of the whole parak. From the tribes that conquered from the tribes who conquered more to the tribes who conquered or settled in less. But what's fascinating is the geographic progression here also went from the south, Yehuda, Binyamin, Ephraim, Menashe, Zevulun, Asher, Naphtali. Right? The progression went geographically from the south to the north, but at the same time, the progression also went from the more successful to the less successful as you move north through the country. You could almost draw a line here in Emek Israel between the tribes who managed to have the majority of their land in their control, Yehuda, Binyamin, Ephraim, and Menashe, to the tribes who had less than a majority of control in their land, perhaps. Issachar doesn't even mention Zvulun, Asher, and Naphtali. That progression, I'll show you in a moment, is very important. But you can see it travels north in terms of the geography, but it also travels north in terms of the more to less successful tribes in this sequence. Which brings us to the last tribe of discussion, namely the tribe of Dan. For some reason, the parak leaves out Yisachar completely. I suspect it's because, and this we'll talk about in the story of Dvarim Barak, Yisachar is essentially assigned the area inside Emek Israel. Emek Israel itself is assigned to the tribe of Yisachar. This is essentially described in the brachos to Yisachar as Yisachar Chamor Garem, Rovetz Ben HaMishpatim. Yisachar, like a stubborn donkey, has to kind of anchor himself between the hills of the land, and that's essentially a description of Yisachar trying to hold on to the area of Emek Israel, either from the north and Menashe from the south, but essentially that territory. So Yisachar doesn't even get mentioned in the parak. Which brings us to the last tribe of Dan. Vayichatzu ha'emori et b'nei Dan ha'hara. The Amorites pushed Dan towards the mountains, towards the hills. Ki lo nitano laredet la'emek. They didn't let Dan come down into the valley. Vayol ha'emori lashevet b'har cheres ba'ayalon b'shalabim. And so the Amorites continued to dwell in the areas of Mount Cheres and Ayalon and Shalabim, and not the tribe of Dan. But Tichbad Yad Bet Yosef v'Yilamas. The hand of the house of Yosef prevailed at some point or another. That's a much later period of time. So I'm going to leave the story of the Gvula Mori Mala Krabim. I'm going to leave the story of Beit Yosef out of the picture for a moment. I want to understand this reference here. Bnei Dan pushed to the mountain. What does that mean? So this really is part of the tragedy of the story of Shevet Dan. Shevet Dan is assigned a tribal territory where, let's go back to that map. Okay, this is the area assigned to the tribe of Dan. If you go to Sefer Yeshua, as we studied in Sefer Yeshua, all the names of the cities assigned to Shevet Dan. And this is their list: Lod and Tzara and Eshtal, actually cities in Judah. They're not even cities in Dan. This is the list of the cities. Says the Navi that the Canaanites didn't let Dan come down into the valley. They pushed Dan back into the mountains. Shevet Dan is the only tribe amongst all 12 tribes to be assigned land that was assigned coastal land only. No mountain region. Tribal territory of Dan is today in Israel known as
Gush Dan.
Gush Dan, right? Tel Aviv and its suburbs. Gush Dan is the tribal territory of Dan. In the time of Tanakh, Dan is unable to get a foothold in the region. Literally, the Canaanites push them back into the mountains. Even the few cities that are assigned, that are attributed to Dan, or to famous people from the tribe of Dan. Who is the most famous person of the tribe of Dan?
Shimshon.
Shimshon. Okay? And if you look at the beginning of the story of Shimshon, you'll see Shoftim Perek Gimel, ויוסיפו בני ישראל לעשות רע בעיני השם ויתנם השם ביד פלישתים 40 שנה, ויהי איש אחד מצורעה ממשפחת הדני. There was a man from the city of Tzorah, from the tribe of Dan. His name was Manoach. His wife was barren and had children, etc. The whole parak is about the birth of Shimshon. Fine. End of the story. Shimshon is born. He begins to operate with the Spirit of God. Ben Tzorah uven Eshtaol, between the cities of Tzorah and Eshtaol. His father comes from the city of Tzorah. Shimshon operates in the tribal regions between Tzorah and Eshtaol. Anybody know where Eshtaol is today?
Yeah, near Beit Shemesh.
Near Beit Shemesh. Famous for? Eshtaol is very famous today.
IKEA.
IKEA of Eshtaol, correct. IKEA is not IKEA of Beit Shemesh. IKEA is the IKEA of Eshtaol. Ben Tzorah ben Eshtaol. Tzorah and Eshtaol are tribal cities that belong to Judah, not to Dan. They're listed in Sefer Yeshua amongst the tribal cities of Judah. Meaning Dan, even in the cities that they settled, they are unable to conquer a single city that was attributed to them. Yaakov saw the potential danger of giving Dan a tribal territory that was all coast and therefore only able to deal with the Canaanites if they could deal with the horses and the chariots. And so Yaakov's bracha to Dan is that he should be a warrior. Dan Yadin Amok Yechad Shivtei Yisrael, he should be a warrior. And Yehidan Nachash Alei Derech Shvifon Alei Orach Hanoshech Ikvei Sus V'Yipol V'Chvo. He should be like the snake or the serpent on the road who bites the heel of the horse and essentially knocks out the motor of the tank to be able to deal with the chariots. That's the only modus operandi that is going to be able to have to fight against the Plishtim and against the Canaanites on the coast, and he's unable to do it. Shimshon was the closest we got, and even Shimshon was unsuccessful. This challenge to Dan was foreseen by Moshe Rabbeinu, and so Moshe Rabbeinu, in his bracha to Dan, which I gave you on the source page, this is the bracha Yaakov gives to Dan. Moshe shifts Dan's focus. Dan Amar, Dan Gur Aryeh Yizanek min Bashan. Dan, like a lion cub, leaps out of the Bashan. And Yaakov and Moshe assigns to Dan a link, a piece of land in the area of the Bashan, which is all the way up north in the area of the Golan. Because he recognized that on the coast, Dan was going to have a child. And that's exactly the story that we read in the end of Sefer Shoftim, as well as in the story in Sefer Yoshua. Again, this is foreshadowing of events that will occur in Sefer Shoftim. But if you look in Sefer Shoftim, beginning of Parak Yud Chet, בימים ההם אין מלך בישראל, בימים ההם שבט הדני מבקש לנחלה לשבת. The tribe of Dan was searching for somewhere to live, because as we just read, the Amorites would not let them go down into the valley, and so they were forced to go find somewhere else to live. They did not have a portion, not because they weren't assigned a portion, but because they could not take hold of the portion that was given to them. And so they take a delegation, 5 people from their strong warriors, Mitzorah u'me'eshtaol, right? Because they were Judah cities that kind of became Dan cities temporarily, to go and spy out the land, and they went north. And they go all the way up north. I'm not going to read through the whole story. They go all the way up north into the tribal territory of known area of the Golan, area known as either Leshem or Laish. In Sefer Yeshua, it's called Leshem. In Sefer Shoftim, it's called Laish, and there they settle. And if you look at a map, this is the area of Asher, this is the area of Naphtali, and this is the area of Dan. What is today famous for Tel Dan and other Dan-related tribal territory, and that's what Dan remained until the end of biblical times. Okay, that's more or less the summary of all the tribes in this parak, with the exception, for some reason, of Yisachar, as we talked about. Now, I just want to pull up one observation, and with that I will close. You'll allow me an extra 30 seconds. If I look at the description of the tribes from south northward, Shimon, leave out Levi for a second, Yehuda, Binyamin, Ephraim, Menashe. Right? Those are essentially the tribes that were more successful in their conquest of the land. And I look at the tribes who were less successful, Zevulun, Naphtali, Asher. Doesn't mention here other tribes. As I said before, Yisachar is omitted completely. Unclear why. And then there's certainly the tribes east of the Jordan are also omitted, Reuven and Gad. One of the things that emerges from this progression and this geography is a very interesting observation on the physical split of the land of Israel into 2 groups. I would call them the tribes from the Jezreel Valley southward and the tribes from the Jezreel Valley northward and eastward. What do Reuven, Gad, Naphtali, Asher, Zevulun all share in common? They're all either on the other side of the Jordan River or north of Emek Yisrael. And therefore they are far more exposed to the threats of either external threats, Moab, Ammon, Aram, and internal threats from the Canaanites who are the Yoshvei Haaretz, who are the majority in that region. Whereas the tribes south of the Jezreel Valley and west of the Jordan River in this box here are more or less much more protected. Their borders are Israelite tribes. They don't border with any external foe except maybe the Plishtim in the south and the Canaanites internally. Yehuda, Shimon, Binyamin, Ephraim, with the exception of maybe Dan. It has to be forced up north. Why is that significant? I'll show you an interesting pasuk. In Devarim Perek Chav Zayin, Moshe describes the famous ceremony on the mountains of Hagrizim and Areva, which are on either side of the city of Shechem. And he describes how the tribes will stand, which tribes will stand for the blessing on Har Grizim, and which tribes will stand for the curses on Har Eval. Who's where? On Har Grizim will stand Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Yosef, meaning Ephraim and Manasseh together, and Binyamin. And on the tribe, on the mountain of Eval, representing the curse, will stand the tribes of Reuven, Gad, Asher, Zvulun, Dan, Naphtali. What just happened? If I look at Shechem as the kind of the center of, in the time of Yeshua, that was certainly the case, right? The center of the land of Israel, then from here, Shechem in the tribe of Manasseh, Hagrizim and Hareval, essentially, if I look at the Emek Yisrael, if I look at the Jezreel Valley as a border, and the Jordan River as a border, what Moshe describes is that the tribes from Emek Yisrael south and Yarden west will stand on one mountain, and Reuven, Gad, Naphtali, Zvulun, Asher, and Dan will stand on the other mountain. And you have this contrast between the tribes on the blessings of the mountain of blessings and the tribes on the mountains of curses, as if to say you represent two regions of this country, and one region is much more exposed. They are much more exposed. Actually, stop this for a second. They are much more exposed politically and militarily, from a security perspective. They border external nations. They border Canaanites in much larger numbers. They are much more exposed spiritually because they have Canaanites in the midst, and they have nations around them, and they have to survive. And Reuven and Gad, in order to survive, have to make alliances with whatever local nations there are. And so what we've already encountered some element of that challenge when, for example, Gidon comes running across the Jordan River, and he wants to be given, his army should be given supplies by the people of Pnuel and Sukkot, and they say no, because our alliance is with the other side. Because those are the tribes that are much more exposed, much more in danger. And so Moshe sets up this ceremony as a kind of a warning, as a kind of a recognition that the borders of the land of Israel, each of them they're not just where the tribes are physically, but they also represent the challenges that the tribes will face down the road. And how they deal with those challenges remains part of the story. Okay, I've overstepped my time by 5 minutes. I apologize. Happy to stop here and take questions.
I have one question.
Yes.
In terms of Dan, I mean, you pointed out that the northern part of the country, the tribes were a lot weaker. So what does Dan gain by going from the south up to the north? The northern places already had their own problems.
What he gains significantly, and this we'll see in the story itself, is an area that's quiet, an area that is he's able to conquer easily, and it's in the mountains. There are very few Canaanites there in the Galil, in the Golan, and he's able to live his world there in quiet, in peace and quiet. That's what he gains. The threat of the Canaanites is on the coast, but in the mountains, in the upper Galil, that's where Asher and Naphtali are sitting, in the upper Galil, and in the upper into what is today Lebanon, in the mountain range region, or the Golan. That's where Israel is settled. They can't go into the coast. The coasts are where the Canaanites are, and that's exactly the issue. So Dan is able to settle in an area in the mountains of the Golan. They're unable to settle in the area of the coast.
What were the three Derachim? Derech Hayam, Derech Avos, and what was the third one?
Derech HaMelech.
Derech HaMelech, right. King's Highway. Very good.
Right. I'll send that map to. Actually, no. Well, no, I can't post it here so easily. Maybe I can. I'm not sure I can post a file that can't be shared. But if I can't, then I will post it on the website.
Can you just post the sources again? You didn't do it. I came in a little bit late. Can you just post your sources again? Thank you. Thank you.
No, I can't post a file.
Do
So
you know?
I will send that on the website.
Do you know why Devorah mentions Yisachar twice?
Yes, but we'll have to wait till we get to Shirat Devorah and our analysis of that to understand. She talks about the tribes who do come and fight against Sisera and the tribes who don't come and fight against Sisera. So she praises one group and she criticizes the other.
Thank you.
May I ask you a question? By the time we get
Sure.
to Shmuel, there's this, the police teams are the only ones with metal. I don't quite understand that. All metal, some weapons, or is there
That's a very specific reference to a very specific moment in time in the days of
Yeah.
Shaul.
I was just
I'm not sure
wondering.
that that's true overall for the period of Shmuel. That's a specific period of time
Okay.
when the Plishtim are in much greater control. The beginning of Sefer Shmuel describes a series of moments, existential crises for Israel when the Plishtim are in control. The fall of Shiloh. Shiloh was conquered by the Plishtim. If you think about where Shiloh is, for Shiloh to fall into the hands of the Plishtim means that the Plishtim are sitting in north, in the Shevet Ephraim. Right? So
Archaeologists have said that although it's not in the Bible per se, we see there are 5 cities in the south, that the police team actually were all over the north.
I don't know if they're all over north for all of the period
All
of
over,
time,
but they were
but
definitely in the
but
north.
they definitely migrate.
have,
They definitely conquer north. And they're trying to conquer the land, and it's an
Yeah.
ongoing battle. That's Sefer Shmuel.
Okay,
We'll get
but
to
here
Sefer
we
Shmuel.
don't see any of this business with the metal.
No.
They have chariots, but
Correct.
we don't assume that there's no metal that
No. No, the problem with chariots is that Israel's this army of soldiers, not an army of horses and chariots.
Okay,
And
thank you
it's,
so much. This is a great class.
No
Really,
problem. My pleasure.
thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
It's
Please
Purim
remember,
Sameach.
no class next week because of Purim. We will reconvene B'ezrat
it's
Hashem
wonderful.
in 2 weeks' time.
Purim Sameach.
Sameach.
Purim Sameach to you all.
Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful shiurim. Thank you so much. They're great.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you.